All right, so it's on the TV too?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. 1 second. Just get my minutes up here. Okay. I'm going to open the Board of Selectmen's meeting of December 6th at 6:30. It's being live streamed and on Zoom. All members are present. Opening comments. I'll read through the typical comments. COVID vaccine clinic, December 11th, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Lynn City Hall. This clinic is open to all. Visit the community calendar at nahant.org for registration information. The winter parking ban will run from December 21st to March 20th from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. No vehicles on the streets during this time, regardless of snow parking ban. Visit the Nahant Police Department if you need a winter sticker waiver. The annual report photo contest. Submit your photos and drawings of your favorite place in town by February 2nd for a chance to be picked for the cover of the 2023 annual report. Visit nahant.org or email ktaylor@nahant.org for more information and contest rules. Preservation, the community preservation application process has begun. Applications are due January 16th, 2024. Visit the Community Preservation Committee page at nahant.org for an application and guidelines. There's some upcoming events. The PTO Christmas tree sales, Tuesdays and Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. To 4 p.m. at Lowlands parking lot. Saturday, December 16th, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Christmas parade fundraiser at the Times Restaurant. Saturday, December 23rd, 6 p.m. is the annual Christmas parade. Monday, January 1st, starting at 11 a.m., annual freezing for a reason polar plunge at Short Beach. People can meet back at the lifesaving station. Josh or Gene, anything on opening comments?
No, I'm good.
No.
Okay. Okay, we have Coast Guard housing update. Tony, you want to do this?
Yes. So we've all 9 properties have been demolished down to a just the foundation. There was 8 underground storage tanks associated with those 9 properties that have been removed, and no contaminated soil was found. So that's good news. When we begun demoing the foundations of the property, there was some transient ductwork pipe discovered under the slab. We are working with DEP on proper disposal of that material and hope to be moving along with that in the next week or two. And I suspect that foundations will be removed completely shortly thereafter. And Dan, can you, or do you have any questions? Anybody on the board have any questions related to the demolition portion of the project?
No.
Good. So DEP has come out. I mean, this is fairly typical for demolition sites, and they'll set some procedures, and our contractor will follow it. I'm sure we'll be back up in continuing the project very soon.
Yes. And Dan, do you want to give an update on the litigation side?
Yeah, we have trial dates with the Goddard Street properties, the two that are there. The first is next Wednesday, December 13th. The second is next year, January 3rd. So they're all coming up pretty quickly. Hopefully, the property on Castle Road will be vacant by the middle of January. So those are the updates. We have meetings set up with our witnesses on Friday for the Wednesday trial. Keep in mind, just because we're scheduled for the 13th doesn't mean we'll go on the 13th. The clerk told me there were 9 trials scheduled that day. We're number 8. So there's a chance that we won't go, but at least we're on the calendar, poised to get this thing moving. So that's where we are with the litigation.
Thanks, Dan. And I know, Tony, you and I met with counsel regarding the process that we'll be taking for the bidding of these lots in compliance with the 2021 town meeting vote. I thought that meeting went well, and I thought we were pretty much all on the same page. Do you want to give us an update on that part of it?
Sure. Our next step is to have the properties appraised. And then once we have the appraisals, that will actually be submitted to the Board of Selectmen through the Town and Land Study Committee. And then the Selectmen will authorize the procurement process of selling off the property. It's a RFP, not an IFB. So there's some criteria that we're going to be creating for the evaluation of the bids. But in our discussion in that meeting, we felt strongly to keep it as, clear cut as possible. And pretty much the criteria will go towards the highest value offered for the property. The challenging part for us is that is staying in line with the motion that was approved at town meeting, while we have 3 properties that are not vacant yet and prepared for sale. And specifically the language in the motion that talks about selling alternating properties in 2 offerings over 2 years. So, with those 3 remaining properties, it kind of throws a little bit of a wrench in how smooth that process could go. But we discussed it for a while. We felt like we could figure out a way to get that done. It may feature one offering may feature multiple properties with a staggered bid opening process. And the idea with that is that, it gives the opportunity for the town to make as much money as possible on these properties. So if we put 5 properties in the first offering, you could have the first property bid opening happen on day 1, the second property open on day 10, the third on day 20, the fourth on day 30. And then that gives people the opportunity that if they miss out on the first property, they can submit a bid on the second or the third or the fourth. So that's the approach, that's the concept. And we're working with legal to make sure that we, meet all requirements of Chapter 30B in that process. And also, make sure that we're compliant with the motion that was passed at town meeting.
Thanks, Tony. That was my understanding of our meeting also. So just to sort of, again, to summarize it a little. So the RFP is an acronym for Request for Proposals. We will outline the conditions or the criteria that was voted on at town meeting as conditions of sale, so that we can boil this down to basically the highest price. We will do an appraisal. That appraisal will set the minimum price that the town will accept for each lot. and then it will essentially be a bidding contest. So there's really not much discretion involved in terms of looking at this, other than is it a valid bid, and all the documents filed properly. But again, we are trying to remove any discretionary conditions other than what was voted on by town meeting.
Mark, Tony mentioned that it was not an RFP, it would be an IFP. What's the difference?
I think it is an RFP, isn't it? Tony?
RFP versus an IFB. An IFB is, kind of like a standard procurement for, say, paving, where you put out, how much square feet or linear feet you're gonna be doing, and it strictly comes down to whoever bids whoever submits the best bid, or the lowest bid, wins the contract. In an RFP, you can actually set it up where, you have different types of criteria that you can evaluate on a scoring mechanism through a committee. And when it comes to Chapter 30B and the disposal of property, it requires that process. But even though it requires that process, we can structure it as close to an IFB as possible, where essentially it's very straightforward as far as how submitted proposals are going to be reviewed and scored. We can essentially establish one criteria, and it be price.
Okay. Thank you.
As the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Josh.
I'll let Gene follow up on his question.
No, I'm finished. Thanks.
Okay, so it's essentially, we get bids on a particular lot and we take the high bidder. Has it been decided yet how those bids are received? Is something the town is handling, or a real estate company, or how does that work? Or are we not that far along yet?
We're not that far along yet, but we did talk about that a little bit in our meeting.
Let me just jump in, Tony. It will require a public opening, Josh. So a time and a date will be set when the town actually opens the bid. That opening is open to the public. People come and watch the opening when we unseal the envelopes and read what the prices are. But we'll be assisted, as Tony said, with counsel all through this process.
Is that a silent bid?
No, it will be open publicly.
Okay. Well, I heard you say open the envelopes.
Yes, so you submit your bid, or your bid for the lot, and other people will, and we may have, a dozen envelopes to open all at once, and who's ever the high qualified bidder, will receive the property.
Okay.
Sounds good. An estimated time frame where, let's say, the first lot will be open for bid?
I'll say spring for now, or early, soon after the new year.
Have we established a minimum bid?
No. That the appraisal is going to help us establish that.
The what?
The appraisal.
Okay.
So we'll put a minimum bid in the procurement documents based on the appraisal.
Understood.
Once the bids are open and it's a qualified bid, It's fairly quick after that. The town could very quickly enter into a purchase and sales agreement, very quickly.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Josh?
Nope.
Okay, great. All right, we have some new business here. We have some meetings to approve. Does someone want to read those motions?
Sure. I move that the Board of Selectmen vote to approve the Board of Selectmen meeting minutes from October 11th, 2023, October 18th, 2023, and November 1st, 2023.
Second,
Motion been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? I just want to thank Kristen for putting these minutes together. She does a great job doing that, Tony. So please pass that along to her.
Yeah, and they're pretty recent too, so we're catching up.
yeah,
That's good. That's good. I mean, that should really be a goal, is to, keep those pretty current, as opposed to approving minutes, from 6 months ago, because they do go on the website and occasionally ask, where are the meeting minutes from such and such a meeting. So appreciate the effort to keep up to date.
she's doing a good job.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing, hearing none, all in favor?
Gene Canty, aye.
Josh Antrim,
Mark Cullen and I. We have some ongoing business. We have leases for the storage of lobster traps down at the compost area.
I move that the Board of Selectmen vote to approve the lobster trap storage leases for the term of 1 year, beginning September 1st, 2023 to August 31st, 2024, to the following people: James Maletti and Tucker Allard. And all the people mentioned above have signed their lease agreement and have paid the required storage fee.
Seconded,
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Tony, are there any left? Does this wrap it up for the season?
No, there's a few more that are coming in. We'll have a few more at the next meeting.
Okay. Sounds good. They're doing a great job. I know that Zach is on them down there, but I think all the lobstermen are doing a great job in keeping the areas clean and orderly. It looks great down there. They're all doing a great job in helping out.
they are doing a great job. Hey, Tony, just one thing that's come up over and over the last couple of days is apparently there was a theft of some lobsters from a keeper trap down there at the wharf. And the question is there any way we can, do we have cameras, security cameras that would catch anybody in the act?
We have coastal cameras that capture especially that area, but they went down and the state police is taking them over, and they're going to be restored in the early parts of next year. So unfortunately, they're not working right now.
Tony,
But they're going to be up.
this is Rob Thibault.
Yep.
State police were in town today. The camera at the wharf has been replaced along with 2 others. We should have the system
good.
up shortly.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, any further discussion on this motion? All in favor?
Gene Canty, aye.
Josh Antrim,
Mark Cullen and I. Okay, now we have short-term rentals. Dan and Tony, you want to bring us through this?
Yes. Dan, you're muted.
There we go. We got a decision from the Attorney General's office on last week, around Monday or Tuesday, and it's no surprise that they approved both portions of Article 24 votes, both A and B. Remember, it was split into 2. The A portion was the general bylaw, and the Attorney General found that we did comply with Chapter 64G, which gave us the home rule authority to regulate home short-term rentals. So that involves the definitions, but most importantly, it involves the rules and regulations. And it's important to note that the rules and regulations will not go into effect until 120 days 120 days have passed after Diane posts the new bylaws, which I believe she did last week. So that means that the Board of Selectmen have 120 days, 3 months, to come up with rules and regulations that will go into effect right around March 1st. I might be a day or so off, but right around there. So that's a Friday, so it could be that Monday. So that was the effect of the first portion of that vote. The second portion was the zoning bylaw. And the AG found that it was not in violation of state law or the state constitution. So they approved that bylaw as well. They did address some floor amendment issues that were raised by some opposition that they received through some residents in town. And the first thing that they said, that she said, was that the floor amendment that was made pursuant to Article 24 was within the scope of Article 24, which is to say that no one should have been surprised that this came up in the discussion. So the AG said that that was not an issue that would have scuttled the vote. There was also a concern as to whether the planning board should have discussed the floor amendment. And the Attorney General said that the fundamental character or identity, and I'm quoting, of the article was not changed so to require another planning board hearing. So that was not a reason to disapprove the second motion under Article 24. Finally, there were some housekeeping issues. That correspondence I mentioned in opposition mentioned that there was not enough time allotted to discuss the floor amendment, and that residents with children were not allowed into the town meeting floor. The AG said that's not within our scope. That's issues within the conduct of the town meeting. As long as the procedure is followed under 40A and Chapter 39, that's the extent of their scope of review. So they said those aren't issues that we'll discuss. If you want to raise it on some other board or some other venue, you feel free to do that, but it's not any reason for us to disapprove of the floor amendment and the eventual vote. So that's where we are at the moment, moving forward.
Thanks, Dan. Tony, anything to add to that?
Well, we have 120 days from when this was posted. I think it got posted on the 27th, or it may have been posted a couple days later. So we have 120 days to finalize the rules and regulations. I've shared a draft of that with the selectmen. I think it definitely needs a little bit more work. We do have a lot in there. We have a ton of definitions, a purpose. We talk about parking plans and rental certificates and inspections, variance, and a number of other things. So I'd like to, sit down with each of you probably on an individual basis, go through those regulations, see if you guys have any comments or questions or changes. And then once those are, deemed officially the first draft, I think we should go through a public process. We should post those regulations, give people the opportunity to review them, submit, maybe have a hearing of some sort to discuss those rules and regulations before we, make them permanent within the 120-day time frame.
Tony, are we going to continue the subcommittee?
We don't need to. The rules and regulations, you are the licensing authority, so it's the Board of Selectmen's regulations, not the subcommittees.
Yeah,
Would it not be a good idea to keep them in it until we come up with the final draft of the rules and regulations, considering their input might be valuable?
Certainly, we're not, their committee has not been extinguished. It's still a committee. It's still an active committee. It was, I believe it was renewed at town meeting. They just have not met, and they're not required to be a part of this process.
I guess I would say that the ball is in our court being the Board of Selectmen's court. So if we for example, Gene wanted some assistance, maybe we could request them to meet, but it's kind of up to us to adopt a set of regulations here. If there's some specific task we want to farm out, that maybe that committee would be a good opportunity to do that. But by and large, it's up to us now.
I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just looking at it from the perspective that they put a great deal of time and effort into that, and they worked hard on this. Maybe we leave it to them if they want to continue this and at least participate however they participate in our meetings. Or we go ahead and run the rules and regulations draft for their tentative approval. I don't know, but I'm just looking at them and the effort that they made and what that might mean to us now.
Okay, I think that's a good. I think that Tony has indicated that they will be included in the process as we move forward. As Josh said, ultimately it is the Board of Selectmen who are authorized to adopt these rules and regulations. But I agree with you, Gene, that certainly we want their comments and their input along with the planning board, who play a vital role in this also.
Yes.
So I think the first step will be for Tony, if you can meet with us individually over the next week or two, to begin to get our individual thoughts about what rules and regulations would be appropriate. We can put that first draft together and then sort of begin the public process to get citizens' input and input of the committee, the subcommittee, and the planning board.
Certainly, and I will say too that this first draft that I've circulated with you all, was developed when the short-term committee was meeting. So they are, the language on that in that document, comes sourced from their meetings and their discussions. So has a lot of their input in it already.
Sounds good, Tony. I know I'm going to ask. I know that I see a few hands up right now. I'm willing to take some input from the public right now, but only on short-term housing issue. So if you have your hands up right now, while we have this subject open, I'd be glad to address your questions. But just leave it. If you have other issues or comments, let's wait to citizens forum. But we'll get this one now, if you could.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make one comment before we move to the citizens portion?
Go ahead.
So I'm only saying this now because it's, we can't discuss these things as a group except during meetings. And so I just wanted to make the point that when we think about these regulations, let's think about the fees in particular and make sure that the fees that are applied cover the town. There's going to be inspectional services. There's going to be, fire department inspections of the properties, all these kinds of things, hopefully on an annual basis. So let's just bear that in mind when we think about what fees are assigned and to make sure the town is covered.
Sounds good, Josh. Absolutely. Gene, anything before I open it up to the public?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Michelle, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Michelle Capano, 29 Ocean Street. Had a couple of questions regarding the town's plan for communication and process to those property owners who are non-owner occupied. How is the town communicating to them to ensure that these properties will not be rental properties after the 120 days? And then how is the town going to enforce compliance or financial penalties to those properties that do not comply and continually rent their properties that are non-owner occupied?
Okay, so I had two questions, Michelle. First, how do we notify them? I'm assuming we have a list of the current Airbnbs, Tony, and the owners in Nahant.
Yeah, we have a list that we were able to download basically through the state's website or through a public records request. Who, which ones have are licensed through the state.
And perhaps, Dan, you could draft a letter that the Board of Selectmen could sign to send to the current owners of these Airbnbs about our new bylaw.
Sure.
And what the process is going to be. Your second question, Michelle, was
So the second question is, what is enforcement going to look like for these properties, including significant financial penalties and liens on their properties?
a lot of that will be addressed in the rules and regulations. In our bylaws, we do have a provision, I believe, Dan, that we can assess penalties.
Right.
Well,
It's roped into the non-criminal disposition
Right.
penalties that we already have in our bylaws.
And then as part of your regulations or process, how will you help and support residences in those parts of town where there have been reoccurring issues with certain problem properties that are non-owner occupied, and what additional enforcement can local law enforcement do to help protect the neighborhood?
Well, if they're non-owner occupied, hopefully they won't exist in 120 days with our new rules and regulations. And those property owners that are owner occupied, I would, again, I think there are provisions, opportunities in the rules and regulations that we can address what the consequences are going to be should they be violated.
Okay, I think this question is really for Tony. And Tony, I don't know if you have this information handy. Do we know what the financial impact will be or is projected for lost revenue on the non-owner occupied properties? And looking back towards fiscal year 2022 and 2023, how are those funds used in the current town budget? Did they go into the general fund and then were just dispersed as part of the whole budgeting expense process, or were they targeted for particular needs? And then later with FinCom, how will we have a potential funding gap?
The funds went into the general fund, so they weren't earmarked for any particular need, just went right into our general fund revenue. We were estimating anywhere from $80,000 to $120,000 on an annual basis from the short-term rental tax. We only collected short-term rental tax for maybe like a year, a little over a year though. So it's not a large sample size.
Mm-hmm.
And we estimate that, 80%, given the size of the residential district, and that most of these short-term rentals seem to be non-owner occupied, we estimate that 80% of that revenue will be impacted by the new bylaw. So yeah, there could be anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 less. It's hard to really tell right now.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's see.
Quick question,
Go ahead, Gene.
if you would. Now that I've already asked how the short-term rental committee is going to function, I'm backing into it and asking, will there be any sense of responsibility absorbed by the housing plan committee as this progresses along?
Those are two separate issues.
Yeah.
Housing that has nothing to do with short-term rentals.
Thank
Okay.
you, Dan.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Gene. George, you're muted. If you want to unmute yourself and Announce your name and address.
Yes, good evening, George Mahovan, 64 Lennox Road. Question, a little confused, when you say rules and regulations, does that mean just for owner occupied? Or does it mean for non-owner occupied also? I don't understand why you need rules and regulations for non-owner occupied, because they're not allowed in town anymore.
No, it's just for the owner occupied.
No, it would
Okay.
be, it would be for all. There, it would be, the general bylaw didn't distinguish between the two.
Yeah, but how would there be, if
So
for the non-owner occupied, if they're not allowed?
They're not allowed in residential districts.
Well, oh, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Yep. Okay, so for the business areas.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everybody.
You too.
Okay. Okay, any other questions on the Airbnb? Okay. Okay, we'll move on then. TA's 2024 goals and objectives. I know that we've been talking about this the last couple of meetings. I've made my comments. I've sent them to Kristen. So I'm hoping that if you haven't done it, to my colleagues, get your comments in to Kristen as soon as you can. I don't want to fall too far behind on this, so that we can establish the 2024 goals and objectives, at least close to January 2024. So if you haven't done it already, so please do it. Any comments on that, Josh or Gene?
Yeah, Mark, if I could, are we gonna follow your lead and put a time frame on these goals and objectives, or just work them on a regular basis?
No, I think we should have our goals and objectives, and then set at least quarterly reviews, and not just set the goals and objectives and wait to the end of the year and then
Yep.
evaluate them. But to evaluate, because things change. I mean, projects timelines change, schedules change. Tony may say, I plan for this project to be start on such and such date and end on such and such date. But with anything in government, things change, and if we meet quarterly and review these goals, Tony would have the opportunity to make adjustments on the fly if needed.
Okay. But yeah, I'll have mine in for the next meeting.
Josh, any comment?
Yeah, I think Kristen has taken our input and consolidated it and circulated it. And I'm thinking maybe we say, call those the goals, and that doesn't mean we can't, for example, add dates. At some time in the future. A good opportunity for that would be for the quarterly review. So I guess I'm of the mindset of, let's call what has been circulated the goals, and maybe at the quarterly review we can say, okay, let's tweak this one or delete this one and add this one, and I don't know, as long as that's judged fair to the town administrator.
Some of what we've got in there, and I agree with what you're saying, but some of what we've got in there is not very direct. It's kind of indirect, because it's something I think that most towns and cities would expect from a town administrator, town manager, and that is the budget and finance items, the general administration items, communication items, those kinds of things that are normal to that type of business. I think I'm looking more at the goals and objectives as we'll call it the big stuff, hazard mitigation and some of those things that we're always talking about, 5-year plans, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the direction I'm kind of going in. And if I'm going in the wrong direction, I want to know.
I agree, Gene. I think, as I think about the goals that we've set for Tony and the goals that have circulated for this upcoming year, some of them, especially ones that are ongoing, start to fall into the category of job description. As a distinction from goals, right? So and that's, you know, part of it reflects the progress that Tony has made in this role, for, you know, stuff that maybe when he was newer, you know, hey, you should really work on this. That's done. Now it's just part of your job. And what's sort of the new stuff, or the big stuff, as you phrased it, Gene, that you know, is outside of like normal, you know, normal job description stuff that maybe should be emphasized a bit.
Well, just as an example, and thank you for the input, but just as an example, a goal would be prioritization. I think it's number 4 on the climate change preparation list. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 projects there alone
Yeah.
that need to get completed, and those some have haven't even.
Cookie, please.
Pardon? You want a cookie, George?
Oh,
Hey, George, can you unmute? George, thanks.
And so you wind up in a situation like that, and then you take another 5 or 6 major projects and add them to that, and Tony's got himself a real set of goals and objectives, and we need to come up with a game plan on how to get those accomplished.
And I think that I think what I suggested, what I hear you two saying is that there are 2 separate sort of goals here. Well, the job description, as Josh had described, those duties that are expected of any town administrator. I don't want to lose the fact of how important they are, because we're talking about budget process. We're talking about you know, administration of town government, and we all have expectations about how well a certain town administrator can perform those duties and responsibilities, and we should evaluate how well they do. Some do a great job, others don't do a great job. So I think they need to remain separate from, you know, project specific types of items, where we can set some dates and timelines to them. And if we meet quarterly and those timelines need to be adjusted, we can do it at that point. But am I explaining it correctly? I mean,
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's a good point, Mark. So speaking of timelines, maybe we should give ourselves one and say, you know, whatever we want to get in this document, get it in by the next meeting, and, you know, speak now or forever hold your peace, kind of a thing.
sounds good to me.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right. Okay, we're gonna move on. Preserving East Point. Josh, I always give you this one. Go ahead.
I did get an email from our lead attorney on this effort, and the judge has set a hearing date of January 24th, and this hearing date is on the summary. On the
Summary judgment.
Validity motions. So I think it's not actually that is a hearing, so it's not a decision timeframe. But so I think when at the last update, the lawyers were expecting that hearing to take place in December, but it's pushed out to January. But at least there's an actual date now, so that's really about it. January 24th for that hearing.
Yeah, and I think that hearing is going to be held in Newburyport. I do believe it's open to the public if anybody wants to go up and to attend. It'll be a fun afternoon. You go out to lunch afterwards and shopping, but it'll be a good day. It is on the summary judgment of the validity of the taking. Basically, what we're asking the judge is to just make an opinion, give us your opinion on, is this for a greater public good or not? And we'll see what happens there. If the judge rules favorably on our summary judgment, then all that will remain is how much the property is worth.
Yeah, so it is a very important hearing.
Okay, let's see, town administrators report.
So, we have a couple things on here and a couple things that are not on here that I wanted to talk about. On the National Water Main Cleaning, so this is the sewer repair work that we're doing, funded through the SRF program and part of our administrative order from the DEP. Our contractor, we awarded this contract about a month ago, and the contractor is ready to get in town immediately. They started this week. Started at the beginning of town, and they're working their way inward. So you'll see their black trucks around. What they're doing is they're cleaning our critical or urgent need sewer pipes and hammering them and determining where spot repairs might need to be taking place, and then we'll follow that up with lining where it's needed. So happy to report that project is already started and underway. They think they're going to make a decent amount of work, decent amount of progress before they would potentially have to shut down for the winter. And then in the springtime, they'll pick right back up and likely do a lot of, part of this project is watertight sewer manhole covers. So likely that phase of the project will occur in the spring.
Tony, I got a question on that. When they're doing their inspection of our sewer mains, will they also be able to tell us if there are any illegal connections?
Well, through the CCTV work, they're going to see if there's any illegal connections entering into the main.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, you know, those connections are in, you know, the basement of a household, or, you know, before it actually reaches the main. You know, those connections are almost being connected into a household's lateral that connects to our sewer main. So they may not pick it up through the CCTV work.
And
it really depends, right?
Yeah, so what I'm referring to is there could be some households where they connect a sump pump, for example, to their drainage, the wastewater drainage pipes. So it probably wouldn't pick that up. I understand that.
Unless we did like a smoke test
Right.
or something of that nature, but that's not part of this
Okay.
project.
yeah, you would need access to the house to do that, right?
Yeah, well, as Tony said, you could do a smoke test and probably see if smoke's coming out of someone's vent. We've done that before. But,
So, pardon me for forgetting, but is the camera work on every sewer main in town, or only the ones that we think are most likely to have an I&I problem?
They were priority 1 sewer lines, which are primarily located in the low-lying areas of town. So I have a map I can show you where they are going to be, but for the most part, the priority ones are low-lying areas because you have that groundwater infiltration happening in those areas as well.
Yeah.
okay. All right. What else do you have, Tony?
Short Beach Dune FEMA funding. I think I've talked about this in a previous Board of Selectmen meeting. We have a site visit tomorrow with FEMA and NEMA at at the Little Nahant Short Beach Dune. We're running into some hurdles with FEMA on the funding to repair that dune. But we had a productive call with them, and the Region 1 director, Lori Ehrlich, who is the former state rep for Swampscott and Marblehead, was on the call. She's familiar with our community, familiar with our issues. And the result from that was this site visit. So they're coming up to Nahant to take a look at the dune and the project tomorrow, and hopefully we are able to persuade them to continue to fund this project. They basically FEMA, just for a quick recap, FEMA obligated or approved about $175,000 to repair this section of the dune, along with the other millions of dollars worth of work that was identified through the 2018 storm damage. We went and had an override. The town approved an override in large part to pay for our 25% of those costs. We then went through an RFP process to hire an engineer for these projects, because FEMA funded projects require that municipalities meet the most strict version of procurement, whether it be state or federal versions of that. And so even though Massachusetts doesn't require us to procure an engineer, federal government does, so we had to do that. So we spent resources developing a procurement for that. We ended up hiring our current engineer. We've paid them to design a project. It's gone through permitting. It's been approved. And now we went back to FEMA to say the cost of material has increased. What was, back in late 2018 or early 2019, estimated $175,000 job is now closer to a $300,000 job. So we put a request in for an additional $125,000, which is a standard process. We've done it with a lot of other projects that never run into this issue. FEMA reviewed that request and said, this project may not be eligible at all. Essentially saying, not only will we potentially not give you an additional 125, we may take back our 175 that we gave you in the first place. So in my conversations with them, I, reiterated how much, time and money and resources the town has invested in this because they obligated it in the first place. And that's why they're coming out. Congressman Moulton's office is going to be in attendance as well, because it's a federal agency. So hopefully they'll be able to apply some pressure on FEMA this too. Essentially what they're hanging their hat on is certain regulations that, require, in order to provide funding, that the beach was an engineered beach and that the town has been maintaining it according to the engineered specs, which, none of our beaches, they're all natural dunes, natural beaches. They're not going to meet that requirement. So hopefully we'll apply some good pressure on them and see a successful outcome here.
Some lobster rolls from Tides might help.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they're spending more money and time fighting this issue than if they would have just gave us the extra 125, in my opinion. Also not on my list on the agenda, but I did want to mention a news article that went out the other day Our police department was awarded $43,533 through a JAG Municipal Law Enforcement Funding Grant. So I want to thank Chief Furlong and the police department for their efforts on that grant. That is going to be utilized to replace 20-year-old security cameras around town that are in much need of replacement. So good job by Chief Furlong and his department on securing that grant.
And I read also that the Johnson School received a grant recently. That's good.
A security grant. Yes, we that was through our state senator and representative through the budget process. Some of that is going towards cameras. Some of that's going through fencing and bollards to provide some safety around the entrances to the building, things of that measure.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll move on. We're on to citizens forum then. Tony, if you have nothing else.
Can I just jump in for 1 second?
Go ahead, Jim.
As normal. Couple of things, it just read off a number of things I want to make changes to in the goals and objectives. And just one goal had 13 projects with it. And it's interesting because in some of the returns that you guys have made on what you see as goals and objectives, one of them was to hire a grant writer and environmental planner. And the more you go through and read through all of the responsibilities necessary to make these things happen with Tony, the more it raises its eyebrows and says, hey, we need some help. So I'm just bringing it out now, thinking about the possibility of looking at getting a grant writer / environmental planner / assistant to the town administrator. That's my thoughts, not yours. The other thing I wanted to bring up was a conversation I had with somebody else, and that's town treasurer, making that a full-time performance-based position as opposed to an elected official. And I know that the clock is ticking and we're coming up to town meeting, something to think about, just throwing it out there.
So the treasurer collector is an appointed full-time position, but our charter dictates that it's a 1-year term. And I have it on my list as a potential town meeting article to amend the charter to turn that into a 3-year term.
What's, if you don't mind, what's the difference in 1, 3, or full-time?
Well, it's a full-time position. Either way.
It's just the contract is renewed once a year, like Tony's is renewed once every 3 years. You just have to be reappointed annually. So it's a little inconvenient, might be a consideration for a person that is looking for a long-term career. They might not want to be in the position where my contract is going to, be subject to the vagrancies of some political axe to grind or something like that. In other words, it might provide him, the treasurer, some
exactly
peace of mind, I guess. Peace of mind if the contract was longer.
Well,
I just throw it out there because the time the clock ticks fast to a town meeting.
a couple of things. I think you're right, Josh, that it's an elected position and
Not elected.
I mean,
No.
excuse me, annual appointment. And it would be better if it could be more long-term and not at the whim of any individual as such. But as Tony said, it require a change in the charter, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but that would require a charter commission to be established, wouldn't it?
It may. I was just thinking about that. The charter commission is much more involved than what we went through most recently with the ZBA. And I do believe if we start messing with elected officials, that's when a charter commission needs to
It's not
be.
elected. It's not elected, Dan.
So then
The
maybe a charter.
alternative, you can either do it through a commission, Mark, or
Yeah.
you can have an article at town meeting that just changes one element of the charter, you know, in this scenario. And then if it passes at town meeting,
And
then
a
it
super
needs to be,
majority.
then it needs to go on the ballot at the next, I think it has to go on a ballot for the next election. Is that right, Dan?
There's a change. Well, if we follow the ZBA procedure, yes, that's exactly right. If it changes the term, that might be a trigger too. I have to look into it. There are some triggers there. But if we are taking an appointed position, making it into a 3-year term, that's a very simple answer to find. But I have to look at that. I don't think so. Come to think of it, but that's a good question to ask. I can have that for you guys by the next meeting.
Well, like Josh just said, and if you could look at that too, Dan, this could be, I use the term full-time position, a career position. Something where somebody could come in and based on their performance would stay or go.
Well, it would be
Okay.
on the contract, any other contracted employee like Tony or Allison or the police chief or the fire chief, they're all in the contract on 3-year contracts or more. And so we're just trying to get the treasurer's position at that same level. I would suggest if we are going to look at a charter change for this, to take a closer look at the charter. The last time the charter, I think, was changed was probably back in 1985, some point. There may be some old issues in that charter that we should address. But if we're going to start looking at a change in the charter through a town meeting and ballot vote, then we should look at other issues in the charter we may want to consider.
Great idea.
Okay.
And
All right,
what about the environmental positions? That's something we can just sit on and think about?
I mean, I think, I think it's the responsibilities there are important, Gene. I haven't heard from Tony that he needs assistance with that at this point. I know he works with Vicky and a few other consultants on these matters. Unless Tony starts calling me up saying, I can't get these things done, I need help. I'm willing to sit on it for a little while. I just don't hear that from Tony.
Yeah, we've talked about it a number of times in the past. I don't think it's necessary. I think we, in the last 5 years, we have over $6 million in grants. We're pretty aggressive, and for our size community and for the resources that we have, we utilize, like you said, our consultants and our project managers to help us, go after some of those grants. And I don't think that it's a necessary add to the staffing at this point.
Okay,
We're on to citizens forum.
George, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Again, George Mahoman, 64 Lennox Road, Nahant, Mass. I just want to make sure that I've got this right. In 120 days, I believe it was November 27th, that I have a copy of the state letter that they sent to the town that's got a town stamp on it as of November 27th. So I'm assuming that's the day it was made public. So 120 days from that date, non-owner occupied short-term rentals in residential areas will not be allowed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think the date is when the town clerk posted it. I thought I heard Dan say.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just assuming that the seal that's from the town of Nahant, the stamp, is on the 27th. So I'm just assuming, and you know what they say about assuming, that that was the date it was made public. I heard about this about 10 days ago, but it was just a rumor. So I didn't really want to contact anybody and say anything, but I heard a rumor. And then when I see the copy of the letter or the ruling sent by the Attorney General, like I said, it's got a Nahant stamp on it of the 27th of November. So,
Was
but
that the
no,
date it was posted, Ken?
That's just the day it was received. I don't think Diane posted it until maybe Thursday.
Diane,
Yeah.
do you know what,
I think it
do
was
you happen to
posted
know what date you
December
posted it, Diane? I see you, on the call there.
December 1st.
December 1st, okay.
okay. So as of December 1st, 120 days from there, then again, the non-owner occupied short-term rentals in residential areas in the town of Nahant will not be allowed because it's against the law.
That's my understanding.
Correct.
Dan, is that your understanding?
I'll read the letter again. My understanding is not quite that. Rules and regulations have to be promulgated by 120 days. The
Excuse me, I couldn't hear
legality,
that.
the rules and regulations have to be promulgated or drafted.
What rules and regulations? Like I said, I thought this was a done deal by the state. They're not allowed. So what rules and regulations do you need for something that's not allowed?
George, again, they are allowed in business districts, so they would
Well, I
apply.
understand that, but I'm talking about non-residential areas. I mean,
Which are-
residential areas. That was my question. I specifically said residential areas. So they will not be allowed in residential areas in this town.
George, it's Michelle speaking. I think, if I can interject, we do need oversight and protection in residential areas, including enforcement and fines and penalties. I would suggest let the Board of Selectmen move forward with creating the regulations that they need, have them published, and we'll have an opportunity as the public to review those regulations within the next 120 days.
Again, I'm very confused. What regulations do you need for something that's not allowed? I don't get that.
There'll be regulations, George, for owner occupied Airbnb.
Again, that's not my question. I'm talking about non-owner occupied. You keep bringing in
George,
owner occupied.
George, the confusion here is that you're referencing the 120 days.
Well, that's
You're
isn't it the
talking
law? You said that about the rules and
Yeah, two
regulations that
separate-
went along with this. 120 days, they come a law.
Two
So
two
why
separate
wouldn't this
things.
become a law?
George, slow down. Separate things. There's the zoning bylaw that talks about where certain types of short-term rentals can exist in the town. And then there's the general bylaw that refers to the rules and regulation. It's the general bylaw that has the 120-day sunset deadline on it, not the zoning. Zoning is in effect.
What do you mean,
So
in effect?
your question was kind of conflating the two topics.
I'm confused, but what do you mean by in effect? Is it in effect now that they're not allowed in town?
The zoning bylaw, yes.
Okay, so again, like Michelle said, what are we gonna do to make sure they're stopped now? I mean,
Well,
to me, it's very simple. It's they're not allowed. They're not allowed. I'm very confused here, and I'm sorry. I'm not upset. I'm just very confused, and that's the way I get when I'm confused. Is I just don't understand this. To me, not allowed means not allowed. The gate's closed. You can't come in.
Okay.
We'll over the next 120 days, we're going to address how we're gonna issue how we're gonna address those things. There are a lot of things not allowed in this town that happen, George. Two-family homes are not allowed in this town, and they happen, right? You know that, and I know it.
But I didn't hear that, Mark. Excuse me.
I said there are a lot of things that happen in this town that are not allowed by law. We have 120 days. We're going to put our rules and regulations together for the Airbnbs and business districts, and we're also going to address the process for fines and other issues that are related to violations of the zoning bylaw.
But again, answer my question. It's against the law to have non-owner occupied short-term rentals in residential areas. Regardless of rules and regulations, it's not allowed anymore. Isn't that what the state?
And as you know, I said in the beginning, I asked town council to draft a letter to notify those owners.
Yeah,
That
but
it's-
no one's telling me, yes, George, this is the law now.
I think
Why
Tony
is that?
Told you that. I think Tony just told you that.
Yeah,
George.
I
Nope.
said, yes, it is the law. But then
Okay.
your follow-up question is, how are we preventing them from happening, right?
Well, that's one of the questions. I mean, Michelle addressed it a lot, some of the questions,
Right,
but
and so those fines, the fines associated with that are gonna be determined through the development of the regulations.
okay, well, I think what's throwing me off is the rules, maybe regulations I can understand about, okay, how we're gonna prevent them from operating, who's gonna be responsible. I understand all that. But it just sounds like you people are very reluctant to say, yeah, there's no more non-owner occupied short-term rentals allowed in residential areas in this town anymore. I'm sure that's the question I'm going to get from everybody and their brother is when is this going to go into effect and when are they are going to be stopped? So I'd like to be able to give somebody some kind of an answer and say, well, I really don't know.
It sounds like we probably have some homework to do, George. That's my take on this, is that we have a little homework to do here before we can give a firm answer on that and how it's
Again, I still
enforced
don't
and all
get
that
it.
stuff.
The attorney general said it's everything is okay. So
Yeah,
I don't understand
that's
why you need to
established.
do your homework. Why aren't we prepared instead of we got to do our homework on this? It's not allowed. Simple fact, it's not allowed. Like I said, the gate is closed. You can't come in. So start
Yeah.
sending out the letters tomorrow.
Hey,
Yep.
George Sheen, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I can understand your confusion. But I think if you just give it that time frame to allow us to go through all this, and I know what you're saying. If you can do it, fine. If you can't, you can't. And somebody's got to step up and say, no, you can't, and back that up. And I think that's what we're looking at. So give us an opportunity to go through that. We'll get back to you, and I know you'll get back to us. So let's work on that together.
Okay, well, Tony answered my question that it's not allowed. And I can understand you people have some work to do. But again, it's frustrating that supposedly this was supposed to be a done deal in 90 days. 6 months later, we finally got an answer. And now we got to wait another 4 months before anything is done. It's just very frustrating. And I'm sure it's very frustrating to the people that live next door and around these non-owner occupied short-term rentals that cause all kinds of problems.
No
So
one
again,
no one said we're waiting 6 months, George. I think if you
that's
listen
120 days. I didn't say 6 months. I said 4 months.
or 4 months, no one said that.
Well,
If
that's
you were-
120 days.
George, stop a minute. If you were listening to this meeting, I asked town council to draft a letter that we could send the Airbnb owners,
Yes.
telling them to cease and desist. That's
Okay.
step number one. All right, that's not going to happen tomorrow,
I
but
understand.
it will happen shortly. It will happen before the 4 months.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey,
Thank you.
George,
Yes.
take it a step further and look at how quickly and certainly the Attorney General's office approved the town's request.
Well, that's believe me, if I could have called the Attorney General and had my say, I would have called and said something. But again, I'm frustrated, confused, and again, I'm not angry at anybody. I'm just frustrated and confused, and this is the way I get. And I heard my answer, so that's great. And it just like it done sooner than later. That's all. And so aren't the people that I talk to too. They're pretty sick about what's going on with short-term rentals as far as in residential areas. So again, thank you again, and I apologize if I've stepped on anybody's toes or get anybody upset. And again, Merry Christmas and thank you again.
Merry Christmas, George. All right.
Thanks.
Any other questions since before?
Mark, I have a follow-up question.
All right.
This is related to Tony's comments on the II work. Tony, you commented on the low-lying areas across town. Have those areas already been identified? Does that area include East Point and Nahant Road and Swallow Cave?
I'd have to double check. I don't
Would it
know.
require, and is this work going to require going on private property? Where easements run through, potentially easements will run through?
I mean, we might have to access the town easement, but we won't be going on to private property.
You will?
Won't,
Yes.
we shouldn't be going on to private property. If we have an easement that runs through private property and we need to access through the easement, that might happen. But we're not doing any work on, like the connection of sewer from someone's house to the curb.
Okay.
That's what you're asking.
No, I'm more just specifically trying to understand some of this where it was a concern very early on around usage of infrastructure for a particular property owner. So, yeah, if you could just, I'll follow up in an email. I'm curious to know if the Nahant Road Swallow Cave area is going to be impacted.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, any motion to adjourn?
And move that the Board of Selectmen adjourn.
Seconded.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Gene Canty, aye.
Josh, and for mine.
Mark Cullen and I. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.